Hey, everybody. Welcome to today's Beyond the Studio series. This is Wendy Mueller. I'm a BRR architecture employee. We are joining you guys live today from Kansas City. So excited to have you here today. This is our second of 7 in our webinar series for students and new graduates in architecture and design. For years, the BRR team has worked with colleges and universities to support the next crop of talent entering the field. And while the pandemic has canceled our plans for office tours, mid-crits, and portfolio reviews, this webinar series gives us another chance to connect with all of you and offer our insights into the working world inside the architecture firm. Before we get started, just a few administrative details. If you have questions today for our panelists, Zach and John, please submit them using the chat function you see to the right-hand side of our YouTube channel screen. And I'll be monitoring those questions today, and we'll try to address those. The panelists will either get to them during their presentation or we'll address them at the end. We are recording this webinar, so if you have peers that were not able to join us today, they are certainly welcome to check back at this channel for the recording. Finally, please sign in for our next webinar next week. The topic is codes, and it's presented by our own Code Services Director and rock star, Eileen Knott. Eileen has more than 25 certifications in various building code specialty practices and is a real go-to for anything related to codes. So we hope you can join us for that. With that, I'd like to go ahead and get us started today. Joining us for today's webinar are Zach Sumada and John Gripka. Zach and John are Directors of Design at BRR, and they have both been with our firm since 2011. They have experience working with retail, hospitality, C-store, and grocery clients, and they are here to walk us through their systematic approach to schematic design. Zach and John, take it away.
Thank you, Wendy.
Thanks, Wendy.
We will be talking about schematic design today. We're going to be talking about something that I think a lot of you guys are doing in your studios is kind of a main focus of how you approach architecture. It's only a small piece of the entire architectural process. And being in a professional studio, it's something that, you can't spend several months on typically. Sometimes you really have to get going on it. So we're going to take a look at how we approach schematic design and how we do this in this professional setting, and just this kind of formula that we've got that is a very plastical or plastic and movable formula, but it's something that really allows us to be creative within that, but keeps us on our trajectory so that we can make sure that we get effective and good designs done in a good amount of time for a variety of different clients. So that being said, I'm John Gripka. My co-presenter is going to be Zach Sumada. We are both Directors of Design at BRR Architecture. You'll notice a lot of similarities there on our about the presenters. We're both KU grads. We both graduated in 2011, and we both started out 9 years ago at BRR Architecture. We went to the same senior year studio at the University of Kansas. There's a lot about us that is similar. We learned a lot of the same tricks and traits of how you approach design and schematic design. And so we brought that into the professional setting. And I think that's kind of helped us develop a pretty good formula for how we can go about designing. And I don't want to say formula too often, because that does sound like there's a specific set of things that you do. But it is a way that's just, we can kind of be creative and a certain path that keeps us productive. And I don't know, Zach, is there anything I'm forgetting here? Should we show real quick? Okay, wave to the camera, Zach. Say hi. There you go. Okay.
Hello, everyone.
So let's go ahead and move on. Housekeeping. Wendy touched on this. So again, please register at Eventbrite, and we'll make sure to get an RSVP out to you for each of these sessions. And don't forget about that Q&A afterwards. So let's get into this. When designing in the professional world, there are a few things that we need to consider, and it is that you are not designing for yourself. You're not designing for a professor. You're designing for a client to meet a goal. Traditionally, you're designing for a client to meet a goal. And so there are a few things that go along with that. The first of which is that you have deadlines and you have budgets. You know, your client ultimately is going to be paying you or your firm a sum of money so that you can provide them a specific deliverable. And so you have to kind of work within the parameters of that. Next thing is that, you know, clients, they're not going to come in and just give you a blank sheet of paper traditionally and just say, go, you know, let's see what you can do. I'm going to say yes to whatever is in your head. They're going to have a vision and an expectation that you kind of need to meet. And it's something that you have to work with them to kind of introduce them to the idea of what good architectural design is, as well as kind of working with their expectations of what that design should be for the building that they're ultimately asking you to design. And you have to do so in such a way that you're working with somebody that might not be completely fluent in how you speak about architecture. So you really need to kind of break down the way that you talk about your design. They may not know what a cornice or a pediment or you know, mullions or, you know, a range screen system. They might not know what any of this is. And so you have to be really kind of eloquent in how you talk to them about the different pieces of their designs that you present it to them. And you need to kind of work with them to get them to understand what your vision is, and come up with a, you know, your vision, and kind of marry that with their vision, and do so in such a language where you're kind of talking, you know, in something you both can speak. The second piece of this is that most of you are going to come out of school and you're going to work for an architectural office. And some clients, they'll ask you to, you know, they'll ask you to design something that is the cheapest and most inexpensive building possible. They don't care about the ornament or the look of it. You probably don't want to do that just from the ethical and moral standards of being an architect, but also your office might have some design standards as well that you need to meet. So you need to work with the expectation of the client as well as the demands of your office. And I put it in here as well, but your office is traditionally going to give you a bill rate, and you take that bill rate times the hours spent on a project. That's the, you know, that's got to fit within that project budget that is provided you by a client. So you need to kind of understand all those logistical pieces as you're going into a design. And then the last piece of this is you have to understand where you're designing and what the requirements of that jurisdiction is. So when you design a building, it's going to be in a city or a county somewhere, and that city or county is going to have some design standards that you need to adhere to, whether it's materials, whether it's, you know, styles or heights, or you know, breaks and planes or parapets. You need to understand all that information, and it's your responsibility to communicate that back to the client. So if they say, you know, I want this really clean, you know, simple form without too much break or too much ornament on it, well, maybe the jurisdiction you're going into requires some of that stuff. And so you have to kind of work between those expectations of that jurisdiction and your client, as well as, you know, the expectation of your office just purely from design, and juggle all of this different stuff so that you can get a design that is successful, not just in your eyes and in your peers' eyes, but also in your client's eyes and in the city's eyes. It's a lot of stuff to consider. And ultimately what we needed to do, just because of the just sheer breadth and volume of design that we do at BRR Architecture, we need to figure out a way that we can approach this in such a way that we can do it efficiently, and not get really hung up on certain aspects of it, or get too far along before we get kind of caught in the wrong direction. We need to, you know, figure this stuff out early on. And so what Zach's going to do is show you this formula that we have, and I need to stop saying formula. Zach, you need to hit me next time I say formula. But we developed this process that is going to allow us to kind of move through this in a step-by-step way that gives us the freedom to design for any client, but allows us to do kind of a really focused design effort. And so what that is our design process, as you see here.
Yeah, and so this is something that we developed at BRR over the last decade, really to help facilitate design and a standardization for how we go about this process. It's not to say it's not fluid and there's not different things that can change or be amended, but this is the general process that we follow, because as John had mentioned in those previous slides, you're designing for so many people and under such a tight timeline. When you start with a blank sheet of paper and your programmatic requirements from your client, it becomes kind of daunting at times to dive into it. And, you know, as you guys are in school, you're often just given a deadline of next Wednesday or next Friday, but there's no budget or associated with necessarily with that requirement. Well, in the professional world, there's very much a timeline and a budget because you have to get paid at the end of the day. And so we developed this process mainly to keep us on track and to help to communicate to the client, especially how they're going to be guided through this process. Because oftentimes the clients that you're meeting with have never met with an architect before, they've never built a building before, and the lingo and the process is kind of new to them. And so we're going to run through this today. And our design process really starts with that connect phase. It's the first business development meeting. It's that first meeting with the client to discuss what their goals are for the project, what their business goals are, what their budget is, what it is that they're looking for. And oftentimes you're going to help them figure out exactly what that program is. It's very rare that a client will come to you with a sheet of paper that says, I need, for this example, we'll be using an office building. So I need X number of conference rooms, X number of offices, and this many workstations. We as architects oftentimes are helping them create that, understanding the requirements associated with exiting and understanding the exact layout. All those different things are what you're going to have to extract from them in order to build a successful project.
In that first phase also, that's a really good time that you lay out some of that jurisdictional stuff. That's where you get those kind of prerequisites before you even put pen to paper. You get that all on the table so that everybody starts at the same point and kind of understands the same challenges based with that.
Yeah, because oftentimes when it comes to these jurisdictions, you don't want to suggest a building or propose a building that's 60 feet tall when the city requirements for that area or that piece of land won't allow that. And so that early phase of identifying and outlining the goals, outlining the program, setting up weekly schedules, scope of work, all that stuff happens very, very early on. And then from that point, you really start to dive into exactly what this building or buildings could be. So for this example, we're going to be using BRR's new headquarters in Overland Park off 82nd and Metcalf. And we're going to be taking you through our design process for that building and relating it to schematic design as a whole throughout the architecture field. And in this phase, this is where we started to get into site plan studies to understand the spatial requirements, the amount of parking, the amount of usable square footage we could get on the site, what that does to adding a parking deck, which you see dashed in there. And then from that point, taking that to our developer, our client, who happened to be our principal and leadership group, and start to go through this exact design process of figuring out, well, will this work for the given project type and requirements associated with the site? And what we found in this process was that we actually didn't have enough square footage in order to meet the requirements, and the building frontage may have been ended up being a little bit different. And you'll see that as we develop throughout this presentation today.
And Zach, let's click back to that last slide too, because I do want to point out that this is a really iterative process, and it's one where we do a lot of pen and paper. We do a lot of different options and ideas because there's a lot of feasibility involved in this. And you'll see that this is a really nice hand sketch that Zach did. It's to scale. It shows, how many parking stalls we have. It shows setbacks. It shows basic idea of floor plan. So it doesn't have to be just like, a very loose concept sketch at this point. You can start figuring some stuff out and doing so with pen and ink. And I really, really would encourage everybody before they design anything to just draw some stuff. Just get pen and paper, get loose with it, and really just kind of let your creative muscles expand there. And it's definitely a worthwhile exercise before you get into any design, just to do pen and ink.
Yeah, I should have prefaced that at the beginning, is that you're going to see examples on your screen of a sketch, but this isn't just, hey, we came up with this and that was it. This was an iterative process similar to what you are all doing in studio right now, and you are constantly testing out different ideas because you never know what that next idea can lead to. But the whole concept is to be able to do this very quick and very efficiently. Turning around site plan concepts like this would take an hour. Not days. So you want to be iterative, and you want to make sure that you're thinking through all as many scenarios as possible, but you also want to be mindful of everyone's time. And from there, it really begins. You get into the fun part of, okay, now we have the site, we have a building, we know approximately what the square footage or floor plan is going to look like, but how do we even begin to communicate to the client what this thing's going to look like? And that initial phase isn't just starting out and saying, this is a blank slate, this is what you're going to have. Oftentimes we meet with clients and we say, what is your idea? And they can give you words and they can walk you through, well, I want a modern, or I want an industrial look. I want contemporary, I want traditional, but all those words mean different things to different people. And so the process that we utilize at BRR is going through this process of precedent imagery. And so we put a bunch of projects in front of the client that are built, renderings, details, lighting, texture, they include everything, really to just get an idea for what it is that they're trying to achieve with this. The building in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, very modern. The middle one on the bottom, very traditional. But those different things and the different looks and feel across the board, I would say that three of these buildings are very modern buildings, but they all have very, very different design aesthetics. So extracting that level of detail from the client early on, it's like, well, I really don't like metal panel. I'd like dark wood. I prefer this, rich look to it. I got to have brick on the building. All those different things help you when you start getting into the design phase of being able to jump back to this initial identify and connect meeting of saying, hey, this is what our goal was. This is what we were trying to achieve. And let's make sure that we continue to implement
And
those things.
Zach said something pretty important there too. And that was, they said, I don't like this. I do like this. If somebody comes in and looks at every image that you put in front of them and they say, I don't like any of these, then you have to ask the question, what is it about these you don't like? Because that is just as valuable as, having them say what they love. You can then kind of avoid those pieces, but it's a really, really valuable exercise in that regard, because you can really start to extract those kind of micro pieces of a building that they like or dislike and have something very tangible to take forward into the first steps of design.
And when we started this process, we did the exact same thing with our ownership group, as well as the developer that was helping to build the project. And this initial concept you see on the screen was very, very different than what we ended up with. But this served as a jumping off point, because the developer then can now approach other potential tenants and say, hey, this is the location we're looking for. They can approach banks and they can go, this is how much this building is approximately going to cost. The contractor can look at this and say, this is what we're seeing on the screen. We're seeing butt jointed glass. We're seeing brick. We're seeing a fourth floor patio, randomized windows, full pane glass. This is going to cost X number of dollars. And having those pre-con services happen in this schematic design phase is possible because of the level of detail and that you put into these models. And as you guys are all aware, these things don't take very long to create anymore. And so incorporating that kind of stuff into the schematic design phase is vital for a project's success moving forward. And so what you see on your screen was an early iteration where we oriented our office building east-west, had a drive aisle that paralleled the building. But what we found was that it minimized street frontage, which is a requirement of the city. It minimized the retail frontage, which the city wanted, and it really kind of pinched the parking. And so from this early phase, we were like, okay, well, we need to revisit this a little bit more and to get more square footage and to better understand the relationships of the site.
And, it kind of takes us back there too, because, the part of the initial deliverables is that the developer just needed an image of something to generate that interest and to get that cost. And so that kind of takes us back to those first initial meetings where we would outline, okay, this is what we have to do first, just to see what we can do, see what we can afford, and then we need to revisit. And that takes us into our next phase, and that's the third, which is explore. And here's where we really, we're equipped with the jurisdictional requirements, we're equipped with the cost requirements here. Here's where we really start to get into the nitty gritty and understand functionally how this building is going to work, so that we can start to extrude it up and make it a beautiful piece of architecture. And so as we move forward, you'll see that we just have a ton of different bar graphs, pie charts. We used these surveys as a way to kind of program the building, because the client in this case was the people in our office. They were the architects and designers and administrators in our office. And so we needed to understand what it was that they valued in an office. And so we just asked every question that we could think of that would help, kind of direct where our design would go, and just put it on, I think it was, Zach, was it a Survey Monkey format that we put this on?
Yep.
Yeah. And so we just basically were able to get all this really good, good information to run with. And then that allowed us to move into the first stages of what would be our actual schematic design. And so I'm just going to click through these really quick. You can see some of the questions that we asked. How long have you been at BRR? Ask things like, what do you value in daylight and whatnot. But that got us to the point where we could kind of understand a little bit more about what we needed in terms of just general aesthetic and in terms of functional aesthetic. And that allowed us to do some hand sketches that Zach loves a lot. I'm sure he's very proud of these. I say that in jest, but so we were able to just do some really quick hand sketches just to see what we came up with. These hand sketches, they show the amount of glazing that was expected from the people that would be working within the building. Jurisdictional requirements required these parapets, these roof lines to jog at certain intervals. It required a certain amount of materiality, and so we just kind of took all that information, we packed it in, and we started to do some sketches. And these sketches are a little bit of what we came up with. We also started to get into an actual hardline plan format. So we kind of put the plan sketches aside and started to get into a CAD program. We started to identify, as you see, structural grids. We started to plug in actual workstations and, elevation or elevator cores, and really figure out things like egress and those more functional pieces of the design, and to get that into a hardline format so that we could really accurately see what we're working with and what we could do. Now in this situation, we were taking over 2 levels of this office building. So we did develop 2 levels in this plan, and this is pretty vastly different from what we ultimately ended up with, but it was our starting point. And so that's going to take us to our next step, and that's going to be develop. And so what we needed to do now was to take all that information and all these different pieces from the city that we had to understand, and we needed to get that into a couple of different design options that we could then present to our developer and to our ownership, and to get their buy off on a direction. So Zach, I'll go ahead and hand this back over to you, and you can explain our different options here.
Yeah, so like John had mentioned, you notice on the screen now that site plan is very, very different than what was initially presented. That's because the developer went back and acquired a second piece of property that allowed us to expand the parking and expand the footprint of the building. And so as we got into this, the program kind of changed and evolved throughout this entire process. And so this is again, being quick with a pen and doing quick iterations is vital, just because it allows you to very quickly understand exactly what it is that you can get away with or accomplish with a different layout. And so again, this was probably one of a multitude of options that we looked at as a team to better understand exactly what it is that our goals were and where we wanted to end up. And you'll notice that, for example, the orientation of the building changed, the parking deck went away, all things that created a less expensive product that allowed us to spend money elsewhere. And in this phase, this is where we start to extrude things up and begin to understand even the massing of it. So looking at the elevator cores, the stair towers, the potentials for skylights, and carving and hollowing out this building and starting to create a piece of architecture. This is all the stuff that you do in the schematic design phase. And again, these are things that we turn around in an hourly time block. So again, this was one of a multitude of options for, well, what happens if the stair towers are on the end, a central core with a skylight in it, with an amphitheater style seating. And what we ended up with was slightly different than this, but quick massing studies that we've done here in Sketchup really help to communicate that design. And then going into the present phase, the one thing, I think as students, we all kind of fear at the end. This happens multiple times, and you're going to have feedback from your ownership or your developer or your contractor about the overall look and feel of the building, ways to save money, ways that we can be more efficient. And this present phase for us was presenting to our ownership group 2 different concepts. One that had more of a traditional approach, which you see on your screen here, which raised the entire building up on a podium to store parking underneath. Looking at the massing of it, starting to present to the city and start that communication of, okay, what do you see here, and what are some possible hangups? Starting to apply some materials, some lighting, again, giving it more of a context, building up that surrounding streetscape and making it a believable project, starting to add some scale and texture and some realism to this project. And so that's the Metcalf side of the building. And then moving around to the northeast side, this is where we start to incorporate landscaping. jurisdictions are very particular about that sort of thing, about the amount of fenestration, the type of materials being used, screening parking lots from surrounding residences, screening rooftop units from surrounding residences. And so at this phase, because we're in a 3D model that's very accurate and geolocated, we can really start to understand what we can do. And that led us to our second iteration of this same project, looking at more of a modern approach with this bent frame structure that you see off to the left, creating some efficiencies. Again, this plan, you'll notice, is still elevated. We had a central core that had a lobby in it. And what we ended up developing was, we thought the entire ground level would be parking. Well, that didn't end up being the case, because we found through this process the ability to add some more usable square footage, which you guys will see here in a little bit. But again, these are quick models. These are all rendered out of Inkscape for SketchUp. Very little Photoshop work, except for maybe those birds up in the upper right hand corner. But a lot of this stuff is built into the SketchUp model, again, to expedite this process. So you can spend more time doing the stuff that we love doing as architects, which is the actual design process.
And something about this too, I want to point out, is just the scale that we give to these renderings. This is something you as students can start to practice now. Populate these things with plants and trees and cars. And, Zach, kind of jokingly talks about the birds, but those birds provide some movement and some activity to this rendering. That's a still shot. Like, do that sort of thing, and it's going to really, really enhance your renderings. And it does kind of enhance the way that your renderings are going to be perceived. So that's something that you just got to start doing now, and take that with you in the rest of your career. Show a building, show as it would be, which is a very active and lively building. So our next phase, that's going to be revised. So ultimately, we presented the two options. Our ownership and our developer both liked the second option, the more contemporary option. So what we needed to do now was take their comments on those options and kind of move forward and work with them. So we kind of had this base form, and now we needed to see, what could we do to kind of answer some of these some of these curiosities that they had about the project. And so one of the main issues is that we needed some more retail storefront. And so we went through and we added a little bit of glazing on the first level and kind of brought the scale of this down to the pedestrian level to give that more of a presence there. That was part of it. You'll notice that the materials have started to change. We've really started to look into that material change just to see the effect on the building. And you can see that we've started to get a little bit more purposeful with our planters and our knee walls and things of that sort. And that's because we really started to develop this site and develop what this was going to look like, rather than just having kind of a conceptual building that's plopped on a fictional site. And Zach, there were quite a few more other requirements there.
Yeah, we looked at the amount of glazing. We looked at adding signage canopies per city requirements, the level of vegetation, screen walls for parking lots and car headlights to adjacent properties. Looking at different view corridors from property lines to make sure rooftop units were properly screened. All those different things had to be built into this model, geolocated, the topo built up, all that stuff to communicate to the city, the developer, the contractor, exactly what it is that we're trying to do. But it's just one of those things that maintaining a well-built SketchUp model like this that has that level of detail in it just adds that level of realism and believability to it. That again, at this stage, which is very, very early on in the design process, before anything's even been dug out of the ground, figuring those things out now and having a rough number for what it's going to cost your client is crucial.
Yeah, so at this point, we're going to go ahead and pop over to our SketchUp model here, and Zach can show you a little bit of that work that we're doing in there, just how we can kind of quickly do these different options.
And if you want to stop sharing,
go ahead. We're discovering the magic of Zoom.
There you go. So this is the SketchUp model that we are talking about, and as you can see, everything's built up pretty much all the way around the site. For this color option, we had stopped the site short just to maintain a clean model for looking at these different color options. But what you see on your screen is basically where our building ended up. But what you don't see is layered into this model were multiple iterations of the same model, looking at different color options. We really liked the way that the forms were stacking up in this concept, but we wanted to explore the different material options for our ownership group, whether or not it's using a light beige brick and more of a fiber cement panel here in the middle, or do we go a completely different route, white brick, a dark bent frame metal panel that wraps the glazing, and then leaving that white metal panel box floating in the middle. And what we started to realize is that you start to lose some of that detail and that frame and what it does for the overall architecture. And so looking at another option with, okay, well, what if that panel goes to dark and that bent frame goes light? All these different things are stuff that we explore very early on. And to look at, well, we like the form, we like the proportions, but are we sure about all these materials and what they're trying to achieve? And what we decided on as a group throughout this phase is that, well, in order for this metal panel box here to really feel like it's floating in that that glazing, it really needed to be a light color. And so we went back to our initial concept, which was this white metal panel box framed by the glazing, because as you guys are aware, during the daytime, the glass really does appear to be black. And so doing a dark metal panel box against this dark glazing really just tried to muddy things up. But then we really wanted that frame to pop. And so we went back to that white metal panel, introduced some wood, some linear lights to help with adding some warmth and a different texture. And then switched, you remember in that rendering, we had this whole box as stucco. Well, the city requires a certain amount of masonry. So we looked at floating this brick box above the first floor retail space that we ended up adding. You'll notice that entire ground floor gets modeled up now to show the knee wall and how you circulate around, making sure you have ADA access all the way around the site. And all these different things, it's iteration after iteration after iteration. I think at this point we were to revision 15 on this initial scheme. But these things are happening over days and weeks and not months. But having a model like this has been vital to helping this project become a reality. And it's something that we use for all of our projects across the board.
Yeah, it's really key, that timeline too, is because we're not going in with, finished renderings of 6 different projects. We are going in with a model and basically just, we're basically just, in a matter of minutes sitting with our client, our owners, and saying, all right, what should we do here? Should we make this brighter? Should we make this darker? And coming up with a design that everybody was happy with at the end of the day. And we were able to do that in a really, really efficient amount of time. So this all leads us up after, several different iterations, and after all the schematic work, what we ultimately have is our final phase, and that is deliver. And ultimately what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to come up with a deliverable that your client needs to get this project built. In this case, our deliverable was coming up with what's called a city submittal package, and that's a set of site plans, elevations, renderings that the city can then look at and give their 2 cents on and either approve or reject. And so this isn't something that we just take in and say, here you go, this is what we designed. We were in conversations with the city for months, actually in this case years before we did this project, so that we could kind of keep them in the loop on what we were doing. And so ultimately what we did was we developed this set of drawings, and I'm going to kind of clip this down. There was a bit more that went into it, but I'll show you the relevant design drawings here. So you'll see the site plan. It shows, the final placement of the building. It shows all the different information in terms of setbacks and, parking stalls and topography, all those different things that the city needs to see to make sure that functionally the building will work within their jurisdiction.
It doesn't look like this slide is up.
Oh.
Yeah, while John does that, the city submittal meetings really happened early on to understand their taste for what it is that we're proposing, the architecture, the landscaping, the how you're getting water off the site, how stormwater works, how you're draining the building, how you're screening rooftop units, how your parking's set up, and the traffic associated with pulling into your parking lot. At this site we had 200 some odd employees, and so you've got an influx of vehicles and what that does. And it led to conversations with the city about adding in crosswalks to to Metcalf, creating hawk lights that allow you, our pedestrians or our employees, to get over to adjacent properties that have amenities that we wanted to visit. So all these different things are happening very early on with the city before, again, anything construction related actually starts.
Okay, looks like we're back now. So, so as I mentioned, we've got this kind of full detailed site plan that shows all of that information that the city is going to need to make sure that the building works functionally on the site. We showed just the first floor plan here, though we did submit a full, set of floor plans for the city to review. In this case, we also did fully rendered elevations with material callouts. We didn't get too specific with the material callouts in this instance because we didn't need to. They're fairly general, but it is enough for them to do their calculations and kind of see the forms of the building and understand those. And then lastly, we took the initiative to just do a set of renderings to show what this would feel like on the site. And as I mentioned before, they're very activated renderings with vegetation and cars and all the surrounding context on there. And we showed all different elevations of the building. We also took the liberty of showing dusk renderings to show what this building would look like at night, because that's something as young designers you have to consider, is that a building is going to be it's not going to be in daylight half the time. You need to design a building that's attractive both during the day and at night. We showed some of those perspectives from that approach, so you see kind of where it's at the pedestrian level. And then also showed the perspective from the patio, which is kind of a powerful one for us, and what that view would be and how that would look. And so we, handed that into the city. Obviously, it was approved because we are now moved into the completed building. And so it's a process that this one went, how long, Zach? About 2 years from start to finish?
Just over 3, yeah.
Just over 3. So to get this thing designed up and get all that information and implement it and then get it into the city approved and get it built was a 3-year process. And so it all started though with that initial meeting where we kind of understood what we were doing, and we attacked this in a very systematic way that still allowed us for that creativity but kept us on point and hit those milestones so that we could really keep this thing moving forward that all entities were happy with. And so that's going to be the end of our presentation today. Go ahead and hand it back over to Wendy. She's going to let us know of any questions that you guys had. Just before we get there, I want to say thank you for tuning in and listening to us today. It's something that Zach and I are very passionate about, is schematic design, and we're pretty happy to give you guys a little bit of insight how we do this into the professional world. So take it away, Wendy.
All right. Thanks, John and Zach. Yeah, we do have one question. And just a reminder to today's participants, if you have any questions or comments, just go ahead and type it in the chat feature on the YouTube channel. First question, John and Zach. How do you make a design decision while working within a team that is working on the project?
You never stop communicating with everyone on your team. You don't design in a vacuum. You don't keep ideas, and you don't keep anything that you've designed up away from people. You let people see it at all points, and it's all about collaboration and communication. You are never going to be put in a situation where you're just allowed to design whatever you want without anybody having input on it. So you need to get very comfortable with doing that.
Yeah, the architecture field is one that requires so much collaboration. From meetings with contractors, developers, engineers, both structural, mechanical, all different trade groups. Nothing's ever designed by one person, and designing the project as a team. Oftentimes we get a little bit of that ego of like, well, I want this to be mine. And that goes a little bit out the window, because you have to be able to take feedback. One of the things that we do here at BRR is we do a biweekly open forum, which allows anybody throughout the company to come in and talk and listen about all things design. So we do like an hour-long session of presenting projects that are on the boards or in the works, or where a design team may just be stuck on a design concept, and getting feedback. And it's one of those things where it may not be that an idea is presented and that you instantly implement it, but it may trigger another concept, another path that you want to explore. And so constantly being open-minded to that, and realizing that anybody in that room can offer up an idea that may help move your project forward and make it more successful is crucial, because nothing that you saw on your screen today was done by just one person from start to finish. So, I mean, that's at least how we do it here at BR, and we found it to be pretty successful.
And I'm going to drop in one thing too. If you are on the other end of that and you're offering criticism, never just say you don't like something. Always go in with, I don't know if I like this. Have you tried this? Never just shoot something down. Always go in with an idea of how it can improve the design.
Yeah, you always need to have a suggestion. We don't look at it as criticism. It needs to be constructive. It needs to build upon something, not just tear it down. And so those kinds of ideas of, I really like the way this is going. Have you explored this? Why? It helped me understand this design decision. Asking those kinds of questions helps us as designers not only prove the value of what we're doing, but making sure that we run the traps on, is this a successful move? Is this the direction that we really should be heading?
That's great. So in summary, it sounds like you both would advocate a real collaborative spirit to this part of the process, and also maybe checking a little bit of ego at the door.
Absolutely.
100%. The ego has to be checked at the door.
Yep.
There are too many people throughout our company that know way more than any one person. That collective whole is a lot better together, which is why why we take this kind of approach.
Great. All right, we have another question for the panelists. They wanted to know, if the whole project took 3 years, what was the timeline for each of the steps within the process?
Oh, okay. Well, if the project took 3 years, I'm gonna have to dig through my memory bank here. So the initial project kicked off with an idea from a developer for a potential office building, and they approached us with our experience with that. So we did a couple of quick iterations over the course of about a week or two. And then the project kind of went silent there for a little bit, actually. And about a year later, it popped back up on our radar as it may be a real opportunity, and especially with BRR looking to move offices, became very realistic. So the schematic design phase on this project lasted probably about 3-4 months, and then bled into design development. And when I say design development, which you guys will get into in a later series, is the process of starting the construction document phase while simultaneously running schematic design. At least that's the way we work it at BRR. And so that phase lasted probably a good year of getting into every last detail, figuring all these things out, and then things being molded and shifted a little bit. And then the CD phase took some months after that. So from start to finish, we moved in January 3rd, 2020, and we started this process back in 2016 with an initial concept.
Now, that being said, though, we've taken this process and we've applied it. I mean, I'm actually currently working on a project where we started schematic last week. It's going to be kind of an exterior touch-up, and we're doing the entire process, and it's going to take about a month start to finish to get these, the exterior upgrades applied. So we can really apply this to just about any design or any schematic design that we need to, and it works well.
Yeah, I should have prefaced it with that, is that I've got a hotel project that lasted 5 years. I've had projects that the schematic phase, I've had the schematic phase on that hotel project outlast the entire sequence of a project from ideation to complete construction. So it really is scaled based on the project type, the complexity, the city that you're in. California is a lot longer of a process than some other states are. It just varies by jurisdiction. It varies by how motivated the client is to make decisions and to be able to say yes or no. All sorts of things weigh into this, but that's why we preach this design process, because we feel it is scalable to multiple different project types and jurisdictions. It's a great question.
Okay, at this time, I am not seeing any further questions from our attendees today. And just as a reminder, thanks everyone for joining us today. We are so glad you could join us. And as a reminder, we will be presenting building codes with Irene Knott, a veritable rock star of all things code. next Tuesday at 2:30 p.m., again, Central Time, and we hope you can join us for that. Be sure to check out the BRR blog at brrarch.com to view our schedule of upcoming topics. And please feel free to share this information with any others who may be interested. We're so glad you could be here with us today, and we wish you all, wherever you are joining us from today, stay safe, stay well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.